to censor speech online. Jordan says the House panel report released yesterday is a bombshell. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us why.
An interim staff report titled The Weaponization of Disinformation, Pseudo-Experts and Bureaucrats, How the Federal Government Partnered with Universities to Censor Americans' Free Speech, was released by the House Judiciary Committee on Monday. Jordan called out the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, the State Department, and academics at Stanford University. He says hundreds of secret reports uncovered a joint censorship effort with big tech before the 2020 presidential election, and that communications showed true information, jokes, and opinions were targeted. Jordan says a partnership was set up called the Election Integrity Partnership, or EIP, and shared an email from an EIP member stating it was created at the request of DHS and CISA. The report calls it a consortium of disinformation and says pressure was largely directed one way. Republicans and conservatives were largely being flagged with misinformation, while false information from Democrats and liberals went largely untouched. The report called it a pseudoscience being used to frequently target communities and individuals with opposing views of current narratives. Some of the posts flagged were from then President Trump, North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis, Representatives Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Fox News host Sean Hannity, and satirical media site The Babylon Bee, along with posts from other media organizations and everyday Americans. The report says the federal government's effort was to censor Americans engaged in core political speech leading up to the 2020 election under CISA's Countering Foreign Influence Task Force. CISA Executive Director Brandon Wales told Fox News the agency does not and has never censored speech or facilitated censorship. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Influence. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the story.
Education is a battleground for influence over the next generation of Americans. And unfortunately, our foreign adversaries understand this very well.
That's the heart of the issue that Republican Congresswoman Michelle Steele and Virginia Foxx are tackling with their Deterrent Act. It would require colleges and its staff to report even $1 worth of gifts given to them by foreign countries of concern.
We know that the Chinese Communist Party is not giving money to these institutions for nothing. May be trying to get sensitive national security information. They may just be wanting to influence the way students think.
An issue that lawmakers on both sides acknowledge, leading to a bipartisan vote to advance the bill to the House floor.
What China has been doing in terms of intellectual property threat goes well beyond traditional espionage. The scale of threat is unprecedented in human history.
To infiltrate their development programs or research programs, particularly when it comes to advanced military research.
But China's subversion is only one piece of the puzzle. College students are directly impacted today with rising anti-Semitism. A report finds that over 200 American colleges and universities received $13 billion from foreign regimes, which has helped fuel anti-Semitism on college campuses.
And the colleges and universities raking in money from the Middle East appear to be ignoring Title VI while they allow Jewish students to be threatened and harassed on campus.
And the House Judiciary Committee today held a separate hearing to examine the rise in anti-Israel sentiment on college campuses and the violence that are directed at students who are supporting Israel. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Homeland Security do an extraordinary job of ensuring the safety and security.
That wasn't the question I asked. Yes or no? Do you think that creates millions of people come here, are here illegally? We're not even talking about the gotaways. How many gotaways are in our country here illegally? Does that create the risk of a terrorist attack in our country? Simple question.
Let me assure you, Senator.
Bullshit.
The safety and security of the American people is the single highest priority of the Department.
So you would say it does create a risk?
Mayorkas also blamed the high number of illegal crossings on what he called a broken immigration system.
Senator he broke it.
Expressed different concerns to Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, noting that last year there were almost 110,000 drug overdose deaths.
Secretary Mayorkas, what will the president's supplemental request allow you to do to stop fentanyl from entering our country?
Chair Murray, it will assist us significantly in our interdiction efforts. We already have done an extraordinary job. The men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and Homeland Security investigations have engaged in a number of operations, which is surging our personnel and our technological resources to the ports of entry where the majority of the fentanyl is smuggled into our country.
Mayorkas went on to say that 90% of the fentanyl smuggled into America is smuggled through the ports of entry. Senator Susan Collins suggested that that did not represent the entire situation.
What we heard was that 90% of fentanyl is seized at ports of entry. What that doesn't tell you is how much fentanyl is coming in through drones and coming through from gotaways. The second point I will quickly make is DHS cannot ignore the role that Mexico and China are playing in the fentanyl crisis. The precursors, the pill pressers, are coming from China to the Mexican cartels.
Although most of the hearing focused on Mayorkas, Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra said the U.S. is facing a child care crisis. He explained that the average cost of child care ranges from $5,000 to $17,000 a year. He said the proposed funding could help provide parents with affordable, high-quality child care. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And the strike was conducted by 2 U.S. F-15s against a weapons storage facility. The strike is a response to a series of attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq. The House voted yesterday to censure Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib, a punishment one step below expulsion. The 234 to 188 final vote came after some Democrats sided with Republicans to pass the measure. Representative Rich McCormick moved to censor Tlaib for what he called her anti-Semitic rhetoric and for calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. Tlaib said she will not be silenced, and her criticisms were directed to the Israeli government. She said, quote, "The idea that criticizing the government of Israel is anti-Semitic sets a very dangerous precedent. Many opponents of the censure in both parties cited free speech as their objection and warned of the precedent this censure could set. Tlaib becomes the 26th person ever to be censored by the
kicked
chamber
out.
and the second person this year. Tlaib will have the formal reprimand read aloud to her on the House floor. Tells NTD the state's policies are not sustainable and are impacting the cost of living.
California strives to reach zero emissions by relying on all renewable energy.
But if you look at what we really use to generate electricity in California, it's mostly natural gas.
Susan Shelley is a columnist with Southern California News Group. She discusses with California insider Siamak Karami about California's renewable energy policies. She says renewable energy only provides about 30% of what the state needs.
Every day, starting at about 4 o'clock, it begins to decline. And by the time the sun goes down, solar energy's at zero. And people say, oh, well, batteries. Well, batteries. Maybe 3% of the energy we're using at night comes from batteries, and they run out by midnight.
$10 billion investment in zero-emission vehicles.
Governor Gavin Newsom announced last year that the state plans to achieve 100% zero-emission vehicles by 2035 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Oil refineries have also been shutting down. But Shelley says natural gas and oil are still needed to generate electricity. When the state can't produce enough of its own, it will have to import resources.
They're mandating all electric trucks. Well, the infrastructure for electric trucks is not ready. The electric trucks aren't ready, but the infrastructure for the trucks isn't ready.
According to Shelley, the government seeks to regulate when people will use electricity and how much to use it.
Yep.
It would make the cost of living
Tell
more
you how to
expensive
live.
too, as the cost of clean transportation could pass on to consumers and higher taxes on gasoline.
All of our global greenhouse gas emission percentage in California is 1%. The whole state could shut down, and it would make no difference to the global climate. We are, in California, bearing this tremendous burden financially to model good climate behavior. And it doesn't do anything. It has no effect on the climate.
And other people may not follow it anyways.
If they don't follow it, then for sure it has no effect.
Shelley says it is a balancing act between keeping the air clean, but also generating enough reliable and affordable energy for people to use.
You can't light that up with
Coming
solar
up,
power.
is a UN organization stirring up hate.
It will now be in effect through November 29th to help Georgians pay for travel and food over the Thanksgiving holiday. The gas tax adds about 30 cents per gallon. Right now, the state's average price for a gallon of regular is $2.89. That's actually 50 cents cheaper than the national average.
Still ahead here as we continue tonight at 5. The Marines just bestowed a terminally ill Gwinnett County teenager with an incredible honor. Coming up all new and next at 5. You're going to hear from that brave boy about what it means to be a part of the few and the proud.
Plus, the Braves organization.
Pleasure. Thank you, Josh. So a lot to go into on the elections yesterday. I saw some reports Republicans came up short on fundraising. Any thoughts on what caused the shortages with fundraising?
Well, a few, and I don't know that there's one answer there. One thing is that the Democrats have always been better at small dollar donations. Republicans have been catching up on that, doing very well with the online donations, the $5 and $10 donations that really add up. That slowed down a lot over the summer, so that could have been a factor, even though that was starting to turn around in the third quarter. Another thing that's happened is the races are just getting more expensive. It costs more money to run one of these campaigns. And in Mississippi, for example, where I am right now, we just covered the governor's race last night. A lot of out-of-state dollars came in for the Democratic challenger, Brandon Presley, who was supported to the tune of over $3 million by the Democratic Governors Association. So that's another disadvantage for some politicians when their opponent is getting a big influx of out-of-state cash.
It's interesting. I mean, I know kind of all eyes are in 2024, and I know some people point to Trump with this. A lot of Trump supporters, they're not necessarily Republicans. In fact, I think a lot of them don't even like the Republican Party per se. How do you think that factors into it, or do you think it factors into it?
Well, President Trump is a fundraising machine. Here's a guy that could raise almost $10 million off of a mugshot. So he does take a lot of the money out of the system. For example, last quarter, his fundraising was just under $46 million. So he is soaking up a lot of bucks. And people are looking at this as a potential, so far, between President Trump and President Biden. So they're kind of putting their money where they think the 2024 race is going to be. So I think that's really helping President Trump at this point.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I've been seeing, or hearing reports at least, that Biden's not fundraising as well as Trump. And so what's the difference at the presidential, at the presidential race level versus what we saw on the local level?
The economy.
Yeah, Biden actually was doing okay in the last quarter. His dollars were about as good as Trump's. So he's still getting support from the true blue Democratic base. Whether that will continue as things progress into this race, whether that will continue with the small dollar donations, the retail politics donations, uncertain. But the big money donors are still putting their money with President Biden.
They're the ones that are making all the money
right
off
now
of
is
his new
abortion.
Green Deal.
It seems like people are saying the Democrats won based on the abortion issue. What do you think the election showed us on this?
Well, it showed us that issue is more alive than ever. For years, abortion was a protest issue. It was thought to be settled law in the Roe versus Wade decision. Of course, there was the hope among conservatives, pro-lifers, that enough Supreme Court justices could turn that around. But for most elected officials, there was very little they could do on a policy basis. So it was easy for everybody to be pro-life. Now, when people have to govern on that, we're really seeing a gradation in pro-life views. You have the purist views in which abortion should never or very, very seldom be allowed, and a little bit more permissive views. For example, former presidential candidate Mike Pence was advocating a 15-week abortion ban. Some people would say that's way too liberal. But we're seeing that not all Republicans think alike on the abortion issue. That's what's really happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember Trump actually came out because, of course, the Republicans were debating on it, and Trump actually was not an absolutist on it. I wouldn't say he took the middle ground, but he did seem to suggest that abortion in some cases could be allowed. And of course, he got criticized by the more, strong Christian base. Do you think Trump was smart with that? I assume he doesn't actually support abortion, but I assume he's doing it because he knows that you can't. I think he assesses you can't go fully against it. Do you think that's a proper assessment, given the way we just saw the local elections go?
I think that is a proper assessment, because what we saw in Ohio, for example, a referendum, a ballot measure in order to enshrine the right to abortion, certain other healthcare reproductive decisions in the state's constitution, that passed with 56% of the vote. That's pretty strong. And that shows you that the polls we've been seeing for years would say that most people, including a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservative voters, are somewhere in the middle on this issue. And I think President Trump's comments a while back, I think they reflected that reality.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, on a personal level, I think I'm pretty much absolute. I don't support abortion. But I know that there was some estimate, there was some discussion that with all the new Latin American voters, a lot of them moving more conservative, really for them, abortion is a really divisive issue. A lot of them don't support it either. It seems like abortion was always one of the key dividing lines between Republicans and Democrats. It was one of the issues, like that and gun control, that was the normal debating topic. What do you think changed?
Well, again, I think it's this question of, one, of having to govern on an issue versus to state your personal opinion on an issue. Those can be very different and very much trickier to govern on it. Another is that the electorate's been changing, as you point out, in some ways more conservative, but a lot of suburban districts, you got some purple in there, and you're finding that in more upscale suburban districts, conservative people are not as socially conservative as we've always thought that Republicans were supposed to be. It's just not the case. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of President Trump's supporters don't really consider themselves Republicans, and they coalesce around a certain subset of issues, border security, for example, as one example, but not necessarily on the quote-unquote traditional Republican issues, pro-life issue being one of them. So I think we're seeing a little bit bigger tent in the Republican Party than we've been used to for, say, the last 25 or 30 years.
Yeah, and that brings up, I think, another issue as well, which is the centrist parties and, centrism in America. There's the No Labels Party, for example. RFK Jr. is kind of shaking things up. There's been debates on whether RFK Jr. would take votes from Biden or Trump. Some people say that I think RFK Jr. himself says he'll probably take more votes from Trump. What do you think the elections show us when it comes to centrist voters? How do you think they're going to fall on the ballot?
Yeah, there was a lot of races at all levels. We can talk about school board in a second if you want to. A lot that were very divisive. But one that was not was the Kentucky governor's race, where Andy Beshear, a centrist Democrat, was elected in a really deep red state that holds a supermajority Republican in both houses of the state legislature. Very red state, but it's a Democratic governor, and he was reelected to a second term. He campaigned on the idea of working with anybody that wants to work with them on the issues that matter to Kentuckians. So when we're talking about roads, when we're talking about a state income tax and issues that matter on the state and local level, a lot of these issues just are not partisan or not as partisan. In Mississippi, as I mentioned, the Democratic challenger, Brandon Presley, was actually in favor of some tax cuts that the Republican incumbent was not in favor of. So you think of tax cuts as a Republican issue? Not necessarily all the time. So I think there is room in the middle on these real-life, everyday issues that are not as divisive as the big issues that we see in national politics, for example.
Charlie, stand at attention the best I could.
When the general asked him if he would be able to raise his right hand to take the oath, or if he wanted somebody else to take the oath for him, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, please don't let anybody take this from me, dude. And so he said, no, I got this.
Look closely. The general removed his eagle globe and anchor emblem to give to Jack. And even though Jack's honor has come at the most taxing price.
Still, I've kept like a positive attitude, a hopeful look towards the future, like the whole time. And that fighting spirit, that heart, like that's what makes a Marine.
That's what makes a Marine. The general